Hi. I wanted to talk about one of the best books I've read in the last decade, The Feminization of American Culture by Ann Douglas. On the front cover it says about this book, a fascinating and original vision of the origins of modern mass culture. Well, it's a very interesting subject for all of us. It should be, because mass culture has shaped most of our minds and imaginations over the last 100 or more years. The New York Times, back when the New York Times meant something, said about this book, which came out, by the way, in 1977, indispensable reading for modern feminists and indeed anybody else of serious intelligence. Ann Douglas, by the way, had studied at both Harvard and Oxford, where she studied specifically Victorian literature, to put her in a very good spot to make this analysis of mass culture. The back of the book, the blurb says this book is important, stimulating, and controversial. That's from the New York Review of Books. And then we have the blurb itself. Was the market for Jacqueline Suzanne, who you might remember if you're about my age, was one of the best-selling novelists of the 60s and 70s, wrote The Valley of the Dolls, etc., was the market for Jacqueline Suzanne and the maiden-form bra created in prudish Victorian America. The brilliant and provocative thesis of this book is that the Victorian alliance between women in the clergy and the popular literature to which that alliance gave birth fostered a sentimental society and the beginnings of modern mass culture. It was the age that created the soap opera, a time when the combined sales of Melville, Thoreau, and Whitman were surpassed by Fanny Fern's Fern Leaves from Fanny's Portfolio. Ann Douglas examines the best-selling novels and magazines of the day to show how women exploited their feminine image and idealized the very qualities that kept them powerless: timidity, piety, narcissism, and a disdain for competition. The result was a far-reaching social preoccupation with glamour, banal melodrama, and mindless consumption. Here is a major rethinking of the American past with shocks of recognition for everyone today. And the Atlantic magazine said of it, a feminist work of the best, in the best sense of that word. Its author laments the violence done in the name of gender to both men and women. A responsible and passionate act of scholarship. So I thought I'd read a sample from the introduction to the book. The chapter is entitled The Legacy of American Victorianism. And here Ann Douglas contrasts the life of the 18th century with the 19th, particularly the life in America after the Civil War. She says, the well-educated intellectual minister of the 18th century read omnivorously, but the dense argumentative tracts he tackled forced him to think, not to read in our modern sense. Metaphorically speaking, he was producing, not consuming. His mid-19th century descendant was likely to show a love of fiction and poetry and a distaste for polemical theology. He preferred light to heavy reading. By the same token, numerous observers remarked on the fact that countless young Victorian women spent much of their middle-class girlhoods prostrate on chaises longues, that is, long couches, with their heads buried in worthless novels. Their grandmothers, the critics insinuated, had spent their time studying the Bible and performing useful household chores. Reading, in its new form, was many things. Among them, it was an occupation for the unemployed, narcissistic self-education for those excluded from the harsh school of practical competition. Literary men of the cloth and middle-class women writers of the Victorian period knew from first-hand evidence that literature was functioning more and more as a form of leisure, a complicated mass dream life in the busiest, most wide-awake society in the world. They could not be altogether ignorant that literature was revealing and supporting a special class, a class defined less by what its members produced than by what they consumed. When the minister and the lady put pen to paper, they had ever in their minds their reading counterparts. The small scale, the intimate scenes, the chatty tone of many of their works complement the presumably comfortable posture and domestic backdrop of their readers. They wrote not just to win adherents to their views, but to make converts to literature, to sustain and encourage the habit of reading itself. Inevitably, more serious writers like Melville attempted alternately to re-educate, defy, and ignore a public addicted to the absorption of sentimental fare. That's from the intro to the book, and Anne Douglas goes on to describe the development of this mass culture that at first was novels, and then of course became radio and television and motion pictures and everything else that we know that has developed since Anne Douglas wrote this book in the 1970s. The Feminization of American Culture by Anne Douglas.